The faucet sputtered once, twice, then delivered nothing but air. Sarah Martinez stared at the empty glass in her hand, the silence from the kitchen tap more deafening than any scream. Outside her window, neighbors emerged from their homes with the same bewildered expressions, turning handles that yielded only hollow metallic clicks. Within an hour, emergency vehicles would flood Riverside, their sirens wailing across a city of 60,000 suddenly thrust into chaos. "Mom, the water's not working." 8-year-old Tommy burst through the kitchen door, still in his soccer uniform, sweat streaking his face. Sarah tried the tap again, her heart beginning to race as the reality settled in. No water meant no cooking, no cleaning, no bathing. No water meant something was terribly wrong. The radio crackled to life from the living room where her husband Carlos had been listening to the morning news. "This is KRIV, with an emergency bulletin. City officials have ordered an immediate shutdown of all water treatment facilities following reports of possible contamination. Residents are advised to avoid all tap water until further notice. Emergency water distribution centers are being established." Carlos appeared in the doorway, his weathered hands clenched into fists. At 52, he had seen hardship before, had fled from El Salvador 20 years ago seeking safety and opportunity. But this felt different, more ominous. "Sarah, get the bottled water from the garage. I'll call my brother." Within hours, the city transformed. Long lines of residents snaked around hastily erected tents where volunteers distributed plastic bottles. Restaurants shuttered their doors. The hospital switched to emergency protocols, rationing supplies for critical patients. Schools sent children home early. The elderly Mrs. Chen from next door sat on her porch, clutching a single water bottle, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. Just 3 months earlier, Carlos Martinez had finally achieved his American dream. Martinez Landscaping had grown from a one-man operation with a borrowed truck to a thriving business employing 12 people. Their irrigation systems brought life to brown lawns across Riverside, transforming suburban neighborhoods into green oases. Carlos took pride in every sprinkler head installed, every timer calibrated to perfection. "We're not just watering grass," he would tell his crew, wiping sweat from his brow as they worked under the blazing sun. "We're building something beautiful, something lasting." His English had improved dramatically over the years, but his accent remained thick, a reminder of his journey from poverty to prosperity. The business had grown beyond his wildest expectations. Contracts poured in from all corners of the city. The Martinez family finally moved from their cramped apartment to a modest house on Oak Street, complete with a small yard where Sarah could grow the tomatoes and peppers that reminded her of home. Tommy started playing soccer in a real league, not just pickup games in the parking lot behind their old building. Every morning, Carlos would review the day's schedule with his foreman, Miguel, plotting routes that would maximize efficiency. Their trucks, emblazoned with Martinez Landscaping, growing green dreams, in bold letters, had become a familiar sight throughout Riverside. The business was legitimate, licensed, insured. Carlos paid his taxes, treated his employees fairly, and donated to the local food bank every Christmas. But success in America came with challenges he hadn't anticipated. Not everyone welcomed the sight of Spanish-speaking crews working in their neighborhoods. Some clients questioned every invoice, scrutinized every hour worked. Carlos learned to smile through the suspicion, to document everything twice, to be beyond reproach in every transaction. Karen Whitmore had always prided herself on vigilance. From her pristine colonial on Maple Street, she monitored the neighborhood with the dedication of a security guard. At 58, she had lived in Riverside her entire life, watching it change from a sleepy town to a diverse community that sometimes made her uncomfortable. Change, in Karen's opinion, was rarely for the better. The billing dispute started small, as these things often do. Martinez Landscaping had installed a new irrigation system for her backyard, a complex network of underground pipes and precision sprinklers. The work was immaculate, but the final invoice showed an additional charge for weekend labor that Karen didn't remember authorizing. "This is highway robbery," she announced to her husband Roger over breakfast, waving the bill like a weapon. $1,500 over the estimate. They think because they speak Spanish. We can't understand their scam. Roger, a mild-mannered accountant who preferred his conflicts spreadsheet-based, suggested they simply call Carlos to discuss the discrepancy. But Karen had already moved beyond discussion. She had researched Martinez Landscaping online, found their business license, cross-referenced their work permits. In her mind, the overcharge wasn't just theft, it was proof of a larger conspiracy. The morning of September 15th started like any other for Karen. She reviewed her surveillance notes over coffee, documenting which neighbors had received packages, which cars had parked where they shouldn't. But when she stepped outside to inspect her sprinkler system, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The water pressure seemed different. The spray pattern looked unusual, and there was a smell faint, chemical, definitely not normal. Karen's imagination, already primed by weeks of resentment over the billing dispute, leaped to the darkest possible conclusion. Those people had access to the city's water system through their irrigation work. They had the opportunity. They had motive revenge for her complaint about their billing practices. Her hands shaking with righteous fury, Karen dialed 911. 911. What's your emergency? This is Karen Whitmore at 1247 Maple Street. I need to report a terrorist attack on our water supply. There's a family of immigrants who've been installing irrigation systems all over the city, and I think they're poisoning us. The water smells like chemicals, and people could die. The dispatcher, trained to take all threats seriously, asked for details. Karen provided them with alarming creativity. She described seeing suspicious equipment in Martinez trucks, mentioned unusual activity at all hours, spoke of foreign substances being added to irrigation systems throughout the city. Her voice carried the authority of conviction, the credibility of a longtime resident reporting what she genuinely believed to be an imminent threat. "Ma'am, I'm dispatching units immediately. Please stay inside and avoid all contact with tap water." Within 20 minutes, emergency protocols activated across Riverside. The water treatment facility received orders to shut down immediately. Hazmat teams prepared to investigate. The mayor's office issued emergency alerts. And Carlos Martinez, installing sprinklers at a new development on the east side of town, received a phone call that would change his life forever. The first wave of police cars arrived at the Martinez residence with lights flashing, but sirens silent, a mercy Sarah would later appreciate when she learned half the neighborhood was watching. Carlos was still at the job site, unaware that his name had been broadcast over every emergency channel in the city. "Sarah Martinez, we need to speak with you about your husband's business." Detective Janet Morrison had worked domestic terrorism cases before, but something about this felt different. The complainant had been articulate, specific about the threat, but vague about actual evidence. Still, with 60,000 lives potentially at risk, they couldn't take chances. "Is my husband in trouble? What's this about?" "We've received reports of possible water contamination connected to your irrigation business. We need to examine your equipment and speak with your husband immediately." Sarah's limited English made the conversation more terrifying. Words like contamination and terrorism sounded even more ominous through the filter of her second language. She called Carlos, her voice breaking as she tried to explain what she barely understood herself. Meanwhile, across the city, Panic spread faster than any actual contamination could have. Social media exploded with rumors and theories. Some posts blamed foreign terrorists. Others pointed fingers at industrial accidents. The Martinez family name appeared in comment threads they would never see, their reputation dissolving with each share and retweet. Emergency rooms filled with residents convinced they were experiencing symptoms of poisoning. People reported headaches, nausea, dizziness, all perfectly explainable by stress and anxiety, but terrifying when attributed to chemical warfare. Dr. Patricia Williams at Riverside General found herself treating more cases of panic than any actual illness. But without water test results, she couldn't rule out genuine contamination. Doctor, my throat feels scratchy. My daughter says her stomach hurts. We used tap water to brush our teeth this morning before we heard the news. Let's run some tests to be safe, but try to stay calm. Most of these symptoms can be caused by stress. The city's emergency management system, designed for natural disasters, struggled to cope with a crisis this complex. Water trucks dispatched from neighboring cities formed convoys that stretched for miles. The National Guard received preliminary deployment orders. Governor Patricia Hassan held an emergency press conference, promising swift action against any individuals or groups responsible for this attack on innocent families. Carlos arrived home to find his house surrounded by investigators, his trucks impounded, his equipment being examined by men in hazmat suits. 20 years of building a life in America seemed to collapse in the span of an afternoon. His employees, all of whom depended on daily wages, called with panicked questions he couldn't answer. "Sir, we need you to come with us for questioning." "But I don't understand. What did I do? My business is legal. All permits, all licenses correct." "We just need to talk, sir. Help us understand your irrigation systems and any chemicals you use." The interrogation room at Riverside Police Department had hosted drug dealers, embezzlers, and domestic violence cases. But it felt different with Carlos Martinez sitting across the metal table. Detective Morrison had conducted hundreds of interviews, developed instincts about deception and guilt. Everything about Carlos suggested innocence. His confusion seemed genuine, his willingness to cooperate complete, his documentation meticulous. "Mr. Martinez, walk me through the chemicals your company uses in irrigation systems." "We use fertilizer sometimes." "Yes, but very careful. All EPA approved. Here, I have invoices, safety sheets, everything." Carlos produced a folder thick with documentation. Every chemical purchase was recorded, every application logged, every safety protocol followed. His English might be imperfect, but his record-keeping was flawless. The habits of a man who knew he would always be scrutinized more carefully than his competitors. While Carlos answered questions, water samples from across the city arrived at laboratories. Technicians worked overtime, testing for everything from industrial solvents to biological agents. The preliminary results would take 6 hours. Comprehensive analysis would require 3 days. But early indicators suggested something that made Detective Morrison increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the investigation. The samples were clean. Not just safe, completely normal. Chlorine levels exactly where they should be. No heavy metals, no industrial chemicals, no biological contamination. The water that had triggered a citywide emergency was identical to samples taken the previous week during routine testing. "Detective Morrison, lab results are coming in. You're going to want to see this." The forensic report painted a picture that contradicted everything in Karen's 911 call. Water throughout the Martinez irrigation systems showed no anomalies. Soil samples from their work sites revealed nothing unusual. Even the suspicious equipment in their trucks turned out to be standard landscaping tools, all properly labeled and documented. But the damage was spreading beyond the Martinez family. Business owners throughout Riverside faced massive losses as the water shutdown entered its second day. The Patel family's restaurant threw away thousands of dollars in food. The Hendersons' car wash sat empty, costing them $3,000 in daily revenue. The economic ripple effects would touch every corner of the community. Carlos, I need to ask you directly, have you or anyone in your company added anything to the city's water supply? Detective, I swear on my son's life. No. We water plants. We don't touch city water. We have families here too. Why would we hurt our own community? The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Detective Morrison had heard enough lies to recognize truth when she encountered it. But someone had made the initial report. Someone had been convinced enough to trigger emergency protocols. The investigation was shifting from terrorism to false reporting, from protecting the community to protecting an innocent family from community rage. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Telecom analyst Marcus Chen, working the night shift at the emergency dispatch center, noticed something unusual in the call logs. Karen's initial 911 call had been followed by 3 additional anonymous reports, all describing similar evidence of water contamination, all originating from the same geographic area. But cellular tower data told a different story. All 4 calls had been placed from within a 3-block radius of Karen's house. The anonymous calls, supposedly from concerned citizens across the city, had actually come from the same neighborhood, possibly the same phone. Detective Morrison, I think we have a problem with the initial complaint. Marcus pulled up the audio files, playing them side by side. The anonymous callers had attempted to disguise their voices, but vocal pattern analysis suggested a single speaker. More damning, the specific details they provided, the type of suspicious equipment, the description of chemical odors, matched Karen's original call, almost word for word. The investigation pivoted overnight. Instead of examining irrigation systems, detectives began reviewing Karen's background. What they found painted a picture of escalating conflict with Martinez Landscaping, a billing dispute that had consumed her attention for weeks, and a history of complaints about various neighbors and businesses. Phone records revealed the full scope of Karen's campaign. She had called the Better Business Bureau 6 times. She had contacted the city licensing department twice. She had filed complaints with the Department of Labor about illegal worker practices that proved baseless upon investigation. The 911 call wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a sustained effort to damage Martinez Landscaping. Ma'am, we need to talk to you about your 911 call regarding water contamination. Detective Morrison stood on Karen's perfectly manicured front porch, noting the lush green lawn that Martinez Landscaping had installed just months earlier. Karen's demeanor shifted from helpful citizen to defensive homeowner the moment she realized the questions had turned toward her. I reported what I saw. If you're not taking terrorist threats seriously, that's your failure, not mine. Mrs. Whitmore, we've analyzed the water samples. There's no contamination. We've also traced several anonymous calls that seem to have originated from this area. Can you explain that? The color drained from Karen's face. She had been so focused on building her case against the Martinez family that she hadn't considered how easily modern technology could trace her actions. The anonymous calls, made from different locations around her neighborhood using a voice-disguising app, had seemed like clever evidence gathering. Now, they looked like deliberate deception. I don't know anything about anonymous calls. I made one legitimate report about suspicious activity. Mrs. Whitmore, we have cellular data placing multiple calls from your phone. We have voice analysis suggesting you made all 4 reports. and we have no evidence of any contamination whatsoever. The revelation exploded across Riverside like a secondary shockwave. Karen Whitmore, respected community member and neighborhood watch coordinator, had fabricated a terrorist attack to settle a billing dispute. The economic damage was staggering. Preliminary estimates suggested over $2 million in lost revenue, emergency response costs, and resource expenditure. Mayor Jennifer Thompson faced the worst crisis of her 12-year tenure. The city's emergency response had worked exactly as designed, but it had been triggered by a lie. Citizens who had praised her swift action now questioned her judgment. Business owners demanded compensation. The Martinez family required protection from residents who still believed they were terrorists. How do we explain this to our citizens? How do we restore faith in our institutions when they were manipulated by a vindictive neighbor? City council meetings became theaters of raw emotion. Victims of the shutdown demanded accountability. Martinez family supporters called for justice. Karen's defenders, and she had some, argued that she had acted out of genuine concern, however misguided. The political fallout was immediate and severe. Councilman Robert Hayes, who had praised the emergency response on social media, now faced calls for his resignation. "You shut down our entire city based on one unverified complaint. Where was the due diligence? Where was the critical thinking?" The economic impact rippled through every sector. Insurance claims flooded in from businesses forced to close. The Riverside Chamber of Commerce estimated that the water shutdown had cost the local economy over $3 million. Some businesses, operating on thin margins, might never recover. But the human cost was harder to quantify. Carlos Martinez sat in his living room, surrounded by legal documents and media requests, trying to explain to his 8-year-old son why people thought their family were bad guys. Sarah hadn't left the house in 3 days, afraid of the stares and whispers that followed her to the grocery store. "Daddy, why did that lady lie about us?" Sometimes, mijo, people get scared of things they don't understand. But we know who we are. We know we're good people. The recall petition against Mayor Thompson gathered signatures at an alarming rate. Political opportunists seized on the crisis to advance their own agendas. Radio talk shows dissected every decision, every protocol, every moment of the response. The community that had pulled together during the water emergency now fractured along political, economic, and racial lines. The emergency city council meeting was held in the high school gymnasium, the only venue large enough to accommodate the crowd. Over 800 residents packed the bleachers, many carrying signs supporting either the Martinez family or demanding political accountability. The air crackled with tension as Mayor Thompson took the podium. "Citizens of Riverside, we gather tonight to address the most serious crisis our community has faced in decades. We must confront not only what happened, but how we move forward together." The crowd erupted before she could continue. Voices shouted over each other, demands for justice, calls for resignation, angry questions about emergency protocols. It took 5 minutes of gavel pounding to restore order. Karen Whitmore sat in the back row, flanked by her attorney and husband. She had aged years in the past week, her usual confidence replaced by the haunted look of someone who had become the most hated person in a city of 60,000. Death threats had forced her into hiding. Her employer, a local bank, had placed her on indefinite administrative leave. The neighborhood watch program she had led for 8 years had quietly disbanded. Carlos Martinez took the microphone with shaking hands. He had prepared remarks, but facing the crowd of people whose lives had been disrupted by accusations against his family, the words felt inadequate. "My family came to America for the same reasons as many of you, to build something better for our children. We never asked for special treatment, only fair treatment. This week, we learned that even fair treatment isn't guaranteed. His voice grew stronger as he continued. But I also learned something else. This community has good people who stood up for us when we couldn't stand up for ourselves. People who saw past fear and suspicion to defend what's right. Those people give me hope that we can heal from this. The gymnasium fell silent. Even the reporters stopped typing. In the back, Karen Whitmore wiped tears from her eyes, perhaps understanding for the first time the magnitude of damage her actions had caused. Dr. Patricia Williams rose from the audience. As Chief of Emergency Medicine at Riverside General, she had treated the panic and stress caused by the water shutdown. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had seen the human cost firsthand. I've been a doctor in this community for 15 years. I've seen what fear can do to people, how it can spread faster than any disease. But I've also seen what courage looks like. It looks like Carlos Martinez installing sprinkler systems to keep our lawns green. It looks like Sarah Martinez volunteering at the food bank. It looks like their son Tommy playing soccer with our children, dreaming the same dreams. The crowd began to shift. Applause started in scattered sections, then grew into a sustained ovation. For the first time since the crisis began, Riverside seemed to remember what it was capable of when united rather than divided. The legal proceedings moved swiftly once the district attorney's office completed its investigation. Karen Whitmore faced multiple charges filing false police reports, creating a public panic, reckless endangerment, and economic terrorism. The evidence was overwhelming: phone records, voice analysis, cellular data, and her own contradictory statements to investigators. Her attorney negotiated a plea agreement that avoided prison time, but carried severe financial consequences. Karen would pay restitution to businesses affected by the shutdown, fund emergency response costs, and compensate the Martinez family for legal fees and lost income. The total amount exceeded $400,000 more than Karen and her husband could afford without selling their house and liquidating their retirement savings. Your Honor, my client acted out of genuine concern for public safety, however misguided. Counselor, your client made 4 separate false reports designed to incriminate an innocent family. Her actions cost this community millions of dollars and could have resulted in serious harm to the people she falsely accused. Genuine concern doesn't excuse deliberate deception. Judge Martha Rodriguez had presided over Riverside courts for 20 years. She had seen every variety of human weakness and malice. But cases like this one tested her faith in the justice system's ability to heal community wounds. Mrs. Whitmore, do you understand the impact of your actions on the Martinez family and this community? Karen stood before the bench, a shadow of her former self. The confident neighborhood watchdog had been replaced by a broken woman facing financial ruin and social exile. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Yes, Your Honor. I understand now. I'm sorry. The apology felt inadequate against the magnitude of damage, but it marked the beginning of accountability. Community service hours, probation requirements, and mandatory counseling would extend Karen's punishment for years to come. Meanwhile, the Martinez family began rebuilding their business and reputation. Community leaders rallied around them with public support and new contracts. The City Council issued a formal apology and established the Martinez Community Service Award for immigrants who demonstrated exceptional civic contribution. Local newspapers ran feature stories about the family's journey from El Salvador to successful business ownership. Carlos and Sarah gave interviews about the importance of giving newcomers opportunities to prove themselves. Tommy returned to his soccer team, where teammates proudly wore Martinez Strong t-shirts. We could be angry, Carlos told the Riverside Gazette. We could leave this place and start over somewhere else. But this is our home now. These are our neighbors. We choose to stay and help this community learn from what happened. 6 months after the water crisis, Riverside had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. The emergency response protocols had been updated to include verification procedures for contamination reports. The City Council had established a community relations board to address conflicts before they escalated. Most importantly, residents had engaged in difficult conversations about bias, fear, and the responsibility that comes with community membership. Martinez Landscaping not only survived, but thrived. The publicity, initially devastating, ultimately brought them customers who wanted to support a family that had shown such grace under pressure. Their crew expanded to 20 employees. Carlos opened a second location across the county line. The green lawns of Riverside stood as testament to their resilience and skill. Karen Whitmore had sold her house and moved to a small apartment across town. Her marriage had survived, though barely. Roger had stood by her through the legal proceedings, but their relationship bore scars that might never fully heal. She worked part-time at a nonprofit organization, her community service extending far beyond the court's requirements. The work was her attempt at redemption, though she wondered if true forgiveness was possible for what she had done. The recall election against Mayor Thompson failed by a narrow margin. Voters ultimately decided that the emergency response itself had been appropriate. Even if the triggering event had been fabricated, Thompson used her political survival as motivation for reform, establishing new oversight committees and transparency measures that became models for other cities. Dr. Williams continued treating patients at Riverside General, but she also began speaking at conferences about community health and the medical impact of social crises. Her research on panic-induced symptoms during the water shutdown was published in the Journal of Emergency Medicine, contributing to better understanding of mass anxiety events. Detective Morrison received a commendation for her thorough investigation, but she carried mixed feelings about the case. She had solved it correctly, protected the innocent, and brought the guilty to justice. Yet the ease with which one person's lies had disrupted an entire community troubled her. It highlighted vulnerabilities in systems designed to protect people, vulnerabilities that could be exploited by anyone with sufficient malice or misguided conviction. Tommy Martinez, now 9 years old, played soccer on fields watered by his father's irrigation systems. He spoke perfect English, but was learning Spanish from his grandmother, who had come to live with them after the crisis. When classmates asked about the time when people thought his family were bad guys, Tommy would shrug and say, "That was a mistake. People make mistakes sometimes. The important thing is what they do after." The water flowed clear and clean through Riverside, tested more frequently now, monitored with greater care. But the real change was less visible and more important. In coffee shops and community centers, at school board meetings and neighborhood barbecues, residents engaged with each other differently. The crisis had forced them to confront their assumptions, examine their biases, and choose between fear and trust. Most chose trust. On warm summer evenings, Carlos would drive through the neighborhoods where his crew had worked, checking on irrigation systems and admiring the results of their labor. The green lawns and thriving gardens represented more than successful landscaping. They symbolized a community that had faced its worst impulses and chosen to grow beyond them. The sprinklers would activate at dawn, sending arcs of crystal water across grass that grew stronger with each passing season. In those quiet moments before the city woke up, Riverside seemed to exhale the tension of its difficult year, breathing in the possibility of better days ahead. The water that had once divided them now nourished the ground they all shared. a reminder that even the deepest wounds could heal with patience, justice, and the simple human choice to do better tomorrow than they had done yesterday. Karen Whitmore sometimes drove past the Martinez house on her way to work, seeing the family loading equipment into their trucks, preparing for another day of building something beautiful. She never stopped, never spoke to them, but she carried their forgiveness in her heart like a fragile gift, one that reminded her daily of the weight of her choices and the possibility of redemption through service to others. The crisis was over. The community remained, and in Riverside, the water ran clean.